Ever feel like you're really pushing, really giving it your all, but somehow not getting the results you were hoping for?
Yeah, I think everyone's been there.
Like that personal project that's just stalled out, a community thing that never quite got off the ground, or even just trying to streamline things at work. It can be super frustrating.
Absolutely. You put in all that effort, all that energy, and it's like you hit a wall.
And so often we think, okay, got to work harder, got to push harder. But what if it's not just about individual effort?
Interesting.
What if it's about understanding the bigger picture? Like zooming out and seeing those forces at play that we often don't even realize are shaping our efforts.
Ah, you mean the systems we're operating in, those invisible structures that kind of guide everything.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to dive deep into today.
Perfect timing, too. I know a lot of our listeners have been really curious about this. Systems thinking, strategy, how it all connects.
Right. And we've got the perfect guide for this exploration. Seth Godin's This is Strategy.
Yeah, this book is brilliant. It breaks down how strategy actually works, and not just in the business world.
Yeah, it applies to pretty much every aspect of our lives,
Mm,
from personal goals to community projects to navigating those tricky office dynamics.
Godin really nails it. And it was actually one of our listeners who recommended this book, which tells me people are really eager to figure out how to make things better, make a real impact in their own world.
Absolutely. So in this deep dive, our mission is to kind of distill the essence of Godin's thinking, pull out those key insights that will help you first and foremost actually see those systems you're a part of. Sometimes we're so immersed in them, we don't even realize they're there.
Right. It's like the water we swim in. We don't even think about it until something disrupts it.
Exactly. So we want to equip you with the tools to not just see those systems, but also figure out how to navigate them effectively. And maybe even, dare I say, change them.
Ooh, system change. That's the big leagues.
But it's doable. Godin gives us a framework, practical steps, and a ton of really interesting examples. He covers so much ground in this book, from those subtle feedback loops we mentioned to the power of collective action, community organizing. So no matter what you're grappling with, I'm confident there's going to be something in here for you.
I think so too. He really covers the whole spectrum. Okay, so where do we start?
Well, I think the first step is defining what strategy actually is. I mean, what does Godin say it is, and why do we sometimes avoid thinking strategically?
He's got a really refreshing take on it. He says strategy isn't some rigid plan, some document gathering dust on a shelf. It's more like the whole ecosystem that allows things to thrive.
Oh, I like that. An ecosystem. So it's not just about the individual actions, it's about the environment those actions take place in.
Exactly. He even compares it to soil, the seed, and the gardener, all working together over time. It's a holistic approach. I think that's where some people get tripped up. They're looking for that one right answer, the perfect blueprint, and when they can't find it, they kind of freeze up.
Yeah, like analysis paralysis. We get stuck in the planning phase, overwhelmed by all the choices.
And then there's the whole should trap. I should be doing this, I should be doing that, but it's all based on external expectations, not what truly resonates with you. And that's another reason people avoid strategy. It feels restrictive.
Like it's going to box you in.
Yeah.
But Godin actually argues the opposite, right? He says strategy is the path to freedom.
Totally. Because when you have a clear strategy, you're not just reacting to whatever comes your way, you're making intentional choices that align with your values and your goals.
So it's less about limitations and more about making choices that empower you.
Exactly. He's very clear that just hoping for the best, like winning the lottery, that's not a strategy.
Definitely not a reliable one.
And neither is just randomly trying a bunch of different things, hoping something sticks. It's got to be more cohesive than that.
It's about having that underlying intentionality, that guiding principle that informs your actions.
Yeah. He talks about this idea of nostalgia for the future. Like, we all have this vision of a future we'd like to live in, but a strategy is what makes that vision attainable. It's the bridge between where we are and where we want to be.
I love that. Nostalgia for the future. And that ties into something else he mentions, the difference between doing our job and doing our work.
Oh, yes. That's a crucial distinction.
So doing our job is like following the instructions, going through the motions.
Whereas doing our work is about making a real difference, creating something meaningful.
And Godin argues that strategy is what allows us to shift from just doing our job to actually doing our work.
Exactly. It's that guiding force that helps us focus our efforts and make sure our actions are aligned with our purpose. Okay, so we've got a better grasp of what strategy actually is. Now, how about those unseen forces you mentioned earlier? Those systems we're all operating within.
Let's dive into that. What does Godin have to say about the power of systems?
Well, he points out that we often get so fixated on the individual components, the specific people, the individual tasks, the particular products. But the real power lies in understanding the system as a whole, the complex web of connections between all those parts.
So it's not just about the individual pieces, it's about how they all fit together and interact.
Exactly. And he uses this fantastic analogy with the city of Boston. Think about the buildings in Boston. They're constantly changing, being torn down, rebuilt, renovated. But the roadways, the underlying transportation system, those remain remarkably stable over time.
So it's like the buildings are the individual elements and the roadways are the system that connects them all.
Exactly. And those systems, they have a lot of inertia. They're much harder to change than the individual components.
Because they're so deeply entrenched, so foundational to how everything operates.
Right. And here's the thing. When you work with that system, when you understand its rules and leverage its dynamics, it can be like having an invisible assistant, amplifying your efforts.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. Like you're riding the wave instead of fighting against the current.
Totally. But when you try to work against the system, it can feel like you're constantly hitting roadblocks, sabotaging your own progress.
Like pushing a boulder uphill.
Yeah.
And he gives an example of this, right? Something about Michelin tires.
Yes. Michelin, way back when, developed these puncture-proof tires. Seemed like an amazing innovation, right? No more flats. But guess what?
Uh-oh, I have a feeling this doesn't end well.
The existing system of tire repair shops, they weren't equipped to deal with these new tires. They didn't have the tools, and they weren't incentivized to fix them. So even though the tires were technologically superior, the system itself prevented their widespread adoption.
Wow, so even a brilliant idea can fail if it doesn't align with the existing system.
And it's not just about external systems either. Godin also explores how the systems we're a part of can actually shape our own intentions, our behaviors, in ways we might not even realize.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about the system dictating what we can or can't do. It's about subtly influencing how we think and what we choose to do.
Precisely. He mentions a study about healthcare. They found that when a region had more hospital beds available, guess what happened?
More people got admitted to the hospitals.
Exactly. The system itself, just by its capacity, created more demand. And here's the really important point. Systems can be toxic. They can produce negative outcomes, even if no one within the system actually intends for that to happen.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah. He gives examples like the beauty and fashion industry. They can be incredibly creative and expressive, but they also create a lot of pressure, a lot of insecurity.
And then there's the internet. Incredible potential for connection and learning, but also a breeding ground for misinformation and polarization.
Exactly. So the takeaway here is that we need to be aware of these systems, both the ones we create and the ones we're born into, because they have a huge impact on us.
So it sounds like we're all kind of embedded in these complex, often invisible systems that have their own momentum and can even influence our goals and desires. So the question then becomes, how do we make choices within those systems? Do we even have agency?
That's the big question, right? And thankfully, Godin doesn't leave us feeling powerless. He actually emphasizes that we have a lot more agency than we might think.
Oh, it's good to hear. So we're not just puppets of the system.
Not at all. He says we can make strategic choices, and one of the biggest ones is choosing our customers. By choosing who we serve, we're essentially choosing our future.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about what we offer, it's about who we offer it to.
Exactly. And that choice has ripple effects. It shapes our priorities, our marketing, our entire approach. He also talks about choosing our competition. Like, who are we benchmarking ourselves against? Who are we trying to outperform?
So it's about being deliberate about who we consider our peers and rivals.
Right. And then there's choosing our source of validation. Like, where are we seeking approval from within the system or from something deeper, something more intrinsic?
Yeah, that's a big one. Are we chasing external validation, or are we defining success on our own terms?
And then there's the strategic choice of distribution. How do we get our work, our product, our message out into the world? What channels do we use?
So even those seemingly basic things are actually strategic decisions that can have a huge impact.
Totally. And he points out that trying to appeal to everyone is usually a recipe for disaster.
You can't please everyone all the time.
Right. A much more effective strategy is to focus on someone specific, a specific audience that truly resonates with what you offer. And here's where things get really fascinating. He encourages us to try and understand what the system itself wants, even though it's not a conscious entity with desires like we have.
Okay, that sounds a little abstract. What does it mean for a system to want something?
It's about understanding the underlying drives, the tendencies, the things that tend to scale within a particular system, like the desire for more money, for increased speed and efficiency, for greater security. These are things that are often built into the system itself.
Ah, so it's about recognizing those inherent motivations and figuring out how to work with them, or maybe even leverage them to your advantage.
Exactly. But he also cautions that systems can subtly shift our own goals over time. Like, we might start with one intention, but as we get more immersed in the system, our goals can start to align more with the system's needs than our own.
So we have to be mindful of that potential for mission creep where the system starts to dictate our priorities.
Right. We need to regularly check in with ourselves and make sure we're still aligned with our core values and intentions. Okay, so we have agency, we can make choices within these systems, but let's get even more ambitious. How do we actually change a system?
That's the million-dollar question. And it can feel really daunting, right? Like these systems are so big, so entrenched.
They can feel immovable for sure, but Godin offers some really practical advice. He cautions against always going for the low-hanging fruit. You know, those quick, easy wins that seem obvious.
Yeah, like just do this one thing and everything will be better.
He suggests that those easy paths are often part of the system itself, a way for the system to maintain control. Like, the system is designed to reward those who take the path of least resistance.
So it's about thinking bigger, looking for those leverage points that can create more fundamental change.
Exactly. And he reminds us that significant change takes time. He uses the phrase, Rome was built in a day. Not literally, of course.
Yeah, it's more about the vision, the commitment to a long-term goal.
Right. It's about declaring that vision and then putting in the consistent effort day after day to build and refine the system that will ultimately realize that vision.
So it's that consistent long-term approach again, not quick fixes, but sustained effort.
And he gives this really great analogy. One telephone is worthless. Its value only explodes when it's connected to a network of other telephones.
So it's about building systems, not just individual products or solutions.
Exactly. And then there's the whole concept of feedback loops. These are cycles of cause and effect that can either amplify change, for better or worse, or actively resist it.
So understanding those feedback loops can help us anticipate the consequences of our actions within a system.
Totally. He gives this example of wedding cost inflation. Like, each increasingly elaborate wedding sets a new standard, which drives up the cost for everyone else.
Oh, that's a perfect example. It's like this runaway feedback loop where expectations keep escalating.
Exactly. And sometimes those feedback loops can be really hard to break. But Godin suggests that instead of always trying to fight a system head on, we can also try to work with it to leverage its existing dynamics.
So it's not always about brute force. It's about understanding the system's vulnerabilities and finding those pressure points that can create change.
Right. And he talks about the power of status and affiliation in maintaining existing systems. Like, people conform to certain behaviors and norms because they want to fit in, to gain respect, to maintain their social standing.
So social pressure can be a powerful force for maintaining the status quo.
It definitely can. But that also means it can be a force for change if we can figure out how to leverage it. He gives examples of how cultural systems evolve gradually, layer by layer, like the popularity of Wedgwood china back in the day or the rise of Amazon more recently. These weren't overnight revolutions.
It was a series of incremental shifts that eventually led to a larger transformation.
Exactly. And he gives these fascinating examples of how simply narrating and labeling a hierarchy can change a system. Like those early restaurant guides or the U.S. News College rankings. They created a whole new way of perceiving value and status.
So it's not just about the actual quality, it's about how that quality is perceived and communicated within the system.
Right. And finally, one of his most powerful points, you don't always have to play the game you're offered.
Ooh, I like that. So it's about recognizing that there might be other games being played with different rules and different players.
And sometimes what seems like a simple two-player competition is actually a much more complex multiplayer game. Once you see that, the possibilities expand dramatically.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Defining strategy, understanding systems, making choices, navigating change. But what about some practical tools and mindsets? What does Godin offer to help us think strategically?
He's got a whole toolkit. One of the most interesting concepts is the idea of the first 10. This is about focusing your initial efforts on finding just 10 people who genuinely, enthusiastically love what you do.
Oh, I like that. It's about quality over quantity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The idea is that if you can win over those first 10, they become your evangelists. They spread the word organically because they genuinely believe in what you're doing.
And that ties into the concept of serving the smallest viable audience, right? Like finding that core group of people who truly resonate with your offering.
Absolutely. And he stresses that effective marketing isn't about broadcasting to the masses, it's about engaging meaningfully with those who are already seeking what you provide.
It's about building genuine connections rather than trying to shout over the noise.
Exactly. And he comes back to this idea of understanding your relationship with the systems around you. Are you using the system, or is the system using you?
Ooh, that's a good question to ask ourselves.
And are you trying to change the system? He reminds us that we do have agency, but with that agency comes responsibility. We can't just complain about the system, we have to choose how we engage with it.
And he makes a really important distinction between being passionate about a hobby and being passionate about the work you do.
Right, because a hobby might not be sustainable in the long run, but when your passion aligns with your work, when you've figured out a way to create value for others that also supports you, that's where the magic happens.
It's about finding that sweet spot where your passion and your purpose intersect.
Exactly, and he introduces these really powerful concepts: the circle of us and the circle of now.
I'm intrigued. What are those about?
The circle of us is about expanding our empathy, thinking beyond our immediate needs, and considering the impact on a wider community. And the circle of now is about thinking long term, considering the consequences of our actions, not just today, but years down the line.
So it's about taking a more holistic, interconnected view of our choices and their impact.
Absolutely. And he stresses the importance of gaining customer traction. Like, you need people, not necessarily everyone, but at least some people who are actually using and valuing what you create.
It's about getting that real-world feedback, seeing how your work resonates with your target audience.
And he normalizes this idea that in the early stages, things might barely work.
It's okay to not be perfect right out of the gate.
Exactly. The key is to get that initial traction, that initial feedback, and then iterate, improve, adapt based on what you learn.
Okay, so we've talked about personal strategy, about understanding and navigating systems. Now let's zoom out even further. How does Godin advise us to think about the markets we operate in and the competition we face?
He defines a market as more than just a bunch of potential customers. It's a whole category with its own dynamics, its own rules, its own players. It's got existing competitors, established habits, allocated budgets, even social pressures.
So it's a complex ecosystem in itself.
Totally. And he talks about the challenges of being a market pioneer, someone who's creating something brand new.
Yeah, because you're not just building a product, you're educating the market, creating awareness for something that might not even exist yet.
Right. And that's very different from entering an existing market where you have to find your niche, differentiate yourself from the established players.
So knowing your market, understanding its dynamics, that's crucial for strategic decision-making.
Absolutely. He uses this analogy of seeing the windmill. It's about the level of complexity you're dealing with.
Like, are you just reacting to the wind, or are you anticipating the moves of multiple players in a constantly shifting landscape?
Exactly. And he stresses again and again the importance of having a blueprint, a strategic foundation that guides your actions, especially when you're faced with a lot of choices and a lot of uncertainty.
So it's about having that guiding framework, that North Star that helps you stay on track. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. We've defined strategy, we've explored systems, we've talked about markets and competition. Now, does Godin offer a specific framework that ties all of this together?
He does. He outlines 5 key elements that form a really solid strategic framework. First, awareness of the system.
Yeah, you got to understand the playing field before you can make any moves.
Exactly. Second, empathy for the individuals involved. It's not just about the system, it's about the people within it.
Understanding their motivations, their needs, their perspectives.
Right. Third, recognizing that choices are always available. We always have more agency than we realize.
Even when it feels like we're stuck, there's always some degree of choice.
Exactly. Fourth, accepting uncertainty. Strategy isn't about guarantees. It's about making informed bets and being prepared to adapt.
And fifth, building resilience over time.
Because the system is always changing, our plans are always evolving, we need to be able to roll with the punches.
So those are the 5 elements: awareness, empathy, choice, uncertainty, resilience. It's a great framework to keep in mind.
And he makes a really powerful statement. Culture defeats tactics every time.
Ooh, I love that.
It's about understanding that strategy is often about shaping the culture, the underlying dynamics of the system.
It's about influencing the rules of the game, not just playing the game better than everyone else.
Right. And he reminds us that those unseen systems can really undermine our sense of agency, make us feel like we have fewer options than we actually do. So the first step is seeing the system clearly.
Recognizing those forces at play that we might not even be aware of.
And he boils it down to three really important questions that should guide any strategic blueprint.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with the questions.
Who is it for? What is it for? And crucially, what is the system?
Simple but powerful. Who, what, and what system? Those are the foundational questions. Okay, so we've got a framework. We're starting to see the system. But let's be real. We all face obstacles when we're trying to implement a strategy. What are some of the common pitfalls?
Well, he reminds us that we are not plankton.
Meaning we have agency, we can influence our environment.
Exactly. But effective strategy requires investing in the future. It takes resources and it takes a belief that our efforts will eventually pay off.
So it's about playing the long game, having that long-term vision.
And he connects this to the marshmallow test. Remember that. The kids who could delay gratification ended up doing better in the long run.
Right. It's about being able to resist those immediate rewards and focus on the bigger picture.
And he contrasts strategy with buying a lottery ticket. Like, strategy is about taking action, learning, adapting. The lottery is just passive hope.
So strategy is about taking ownership, not just wishing for good luck.
Exactly. And he says that a good idea inherently creates a certain amount of tension. Like, it challenges the status quo, it exposes the areas where the system is out of alignment.
So it's not about creating conflict for the sake of conflict. It's about identifying those points of friction that can lead to meaningful change.
Right. And he uses the example of the fastest cyclist in the world. He broke records on a recumbent bike, but then he got banned from competition.
Because his bike was too different, too disruptive.
Exactly. The system pushed back against that innovation because it challenged the established norms.
So even when you have a demonstrably better solution, the system can still resist change.
It definitely can. But he also gives a more optimistic example with Elizabeth Dole and the campaign for seatbelt adoption. Like, she didn't try to force people to wear seatbelts.
She created the conditions, the social pressure, the legal incentives that made seatbelt use the norm.
Exactly. It was a much more subtle but ultimately far more effective approach to changing behavior.
So it's about finding those leverage points, those strategic interventions that can shift the system without triggering that resistance.
Right. And one of those leverage points is the network effect. This is something Godin talks about quite a bit.
Yeah, the idea that the value of something increases as more people use it, like social media or the telephone network.
Exactly. The more people who join the network, the more valuable it becomes for everyone. And he says that networks tend to catch on because they're attractive, they're sticky, and they're persistent.
So if you can create something that people want to be a part of, that has that inherent appeal, the network effect can really take off.
Totally. And he talks about different types of strategies that can create system change. Some are based on low cost, like Walmart. Others are based on status, like Harvard. Some leverage affiliation, like fashion brands.
And then there are those that ride a technological curve, like Moore's Law, and those that disrupt the market with a single innovation, like the iPhone or the shipping container.
So many different approaches, but each one leveraging a different aspect of how systems operate.
Now, we talked earlier about the importance of seeing systems clearly. What are some of the things that prevent us from doing that?
Well, he points out that established systems naturally resist change. Like, they're designed to maintain the status quo, to protect the interests of those in power.
So it's not always about malice. It's just about systems doing what they're designed to do.
Right. And he uses those classic examples of Western Union dismissing the telephone and IBM and Digital underestimating the personal computer. These were huge companies, but they failed to see the writing on the wall.
Because they were so entrenched in the existing system, they couldn't imagine anything different.
And he says every successful organization will fail unless it becomes something different before it does.
Wow, that's powerful. It's not enough to just be good at what you do. You have to be willing to adapt, to evolve.
And he reminds us that side effects are inevitable in any complex system. Like, our actions always have unintended consequences, and a good strategy takes those into account.
So it's not just about achieving our goals. It's about being mindful of the broader impact.
And he notes that turbulence in a system, those moments of disruption, can actually create opportunities for transformation.
So it's not always about avoiding chaos. Sometimes chaos can be the catalyst for positive change.
Exactly. And finally, he talks about the role of gatekeepers. These are the individuals or institutions that control access, that maintain the status quo.
So recognizing those gatekeepers and figuring out how to work with them, or maybe even bypass them, that can be a key part of a successful strategy. You mentioned adoption curves earlier. Can you explain how understanding those different stages of adoption can inform our strategic thinking?
Definitely. It's all about understanding how people adopt new ideas and innovations. It starts with the innovators, those who are always eager to try the latest thing.
The early adopters, right. Those who are quick to jump on board, who love to be on the cutting edge.
Exactly. And then there's the early majority, the folks who want to see some evidence that it works before they dive in.
A little more cautious, a little more pragmatic.
Exactly. And then you've got the late majority, those who are even more hesitant, who want to see widespread adoption before they give it a try.
They like to wait and see how it all shakes out.
Exactly. And finally, there are the laggards, those who resist change the longest, who may never fully adopt the innovation.
So understanding these different stages can help us tailor our approach, right? Like knowing who we're talking to and what their motivations are.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest challenges is bridging what Godin calls the gulf of disapproval. It's this gap between those enthusiastic early adopters and the more cautious early majority.
I see. It's like getting over that initial hump of skepticism, convincing the early majority that this new idea is worth their time and attention.
Exactly. He uses the example of the humane AI pin, which had a lot of hype, but struggled to achieve mainstream adoption and kind of fell into that gulf.
Interesting. So how do we bridge that gulf? How do we make it easier for people to adopt a new idea?
That's where scaffolding comes in. It's about creating the cultural and organizational support structures that make it easier and more appealing for people to embrace change.
So it's not just about presenting the new idea, it's about creating the environment that makes it easier to adopt.
Exactly. He uses this analogy of Lukla, the city in Nepal. That's the starting point for many Mount Everest expeditions. It provides the infrastructure, the support, the sense of community that makes the climb more manageable.
I love that analogy. It's like creating that base camp, that safe and supportive space for people to acclimate to the new idea before they take on the bigger challenge.
Exactly. And from a marketing perspective, scaffolding is all about reducing the friction, making it as easy as possible for people to say yes.
Now, when we're trying to introduce something new, we often talk about how it's better, but Godin challenges that, doesn't he? He says we need to be more specific about what better actually means.
Oh, absolutely. Better is such a loaded word, isn't it? It can mean so many different things to different people.
It's subjective. Better for whom? Better in what way?
Exactly. He really pushes us to define what we mean by better. Does it mean more efficient, more sustainable, more affordable, more socially responsible?
More aesthetically pleasing, more convenient. There are so many dimensions to better.
Right. He actually provides a set of questions to help us clarify what we mean by better. Questions about engineering and performance, compatibility with existing systems, complexity, price point, social impact, and how easy it is to try out.
So it's about being really intentional and specific about the value proposition, the specific ways in which this new thing is actually better.
Absolutely. And he also brings in these really interesting concepts of finite versus infinite games.
I'm intrigued. What's the difference?
A finite game has a clear winner and loser, like a football game or a chess match. The goal is to defeat your opponent and achieve a specific outcome.
Okay, I'm following.
An infinite game, on the other hand, has no defined endpoint. The goal is to keep playing, to keep the game going, to perpetuate the system itself.
Interesting. So it's about recognizing what kind of game we're playing and what the rules are.
Exactly. He also contrasts the mindsets of scarcity and abundance. A scarcity mindset assumes there's only so much to go around, that we're all competing for limited resources.
Whereas an abundance mindset sees potential for everyone to win, that there's enough to go around.
Exactly. And he talks about the power of paying it forward, of taking a generative approach that contributes to the overall ecosystem rather than just trying to extract value.
It's a more sustainable approach, more long-term focused.
Exactly. He also distinguishes between strategies of maintenance, substitution, and possibility. Maintenance is about keeping things as they are. Substitution is about replacing one thing with another.
And possibility is about creating something entirely new, opening up new horizons.
Exactly. And he emphasizes the importance of mutual enrollment in those more complex, possibility-oriented games. It's about everyone understanding and agreeing to the rules, working together towards a shared goal.
So it's about collaboration, about co-creating the future.
Right. And he reminds us really powerfully that all of our strategies are all of our strategies. Like our individual actions and choices, they all add up to a larger strategic approach, whether we realize it or not.
It's about being consistent, about aligning our actions with our values and our goals.
He uses the example of Walmart's decision not to directly compete with Amazon in certain online retail battles. They recognized that it wasn't a game they could win, so they focused their efforts elsewhere.
It's about choosing your battles wisely, recognizing when to walk away.
Exactly. And he also talks about the strategic advantage of sometimes fitting into a standard package to gain initial traction.
Like, sometimes you have to play by the existing rules to get your foot in the door. Expert speaker.